Ja.
Dear participants, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on technology and innovation for gender equality. Finland is one of the leading countries globally in the field of technology and innovations. The rights of women and girls are a central priority in our foreign policy. Against this background, Finland will be leading the way and bridging the gender digital divide in the Generation Equality Initiative. In this initiative, Finland is a proud co-leader of the Action Coalition on Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality. Generation Equality aims to remove systemic barriers to gender equality and speed up the realization of the rights of women and girls. We also need to make innovations more inclusive for women. Our vision for the Action Coalition is to bring more and more women into the field of technology as real change makers, as entrepreneurs, developers, and investors. In this way, we can make technology more gender responsive and the digital future more gender equal. I also think that we must expand access to digital infrastructure for all women and girls and support their digital skills. We must also create safe digital space to enable women and girls to use their voices online without the threat of harassment or hate speech. Dear participants, during the COVID pandemic, our everyday life, including work and education, has rapidly switched to a digital format. However, crises are never gender neutral. We must see to it that when we build back better and greener, we also build back more equal and leave no one behind. Finland is committed to taking the global gender equality agenda to the next level. We hope to do this together with all of you. Partnerships are crucial in making system-wide change in a reality. The Generation Equality Initiative provides many opportunities for Finnish stakeholders to participate and share their vision, engagement, and commitment. I wish you all an interesting and fruitful webinar and hope to continue discussions with you on this very, very important topic. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jarmo Sareva, and I am the Ambassador for Innovation at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. I wish to thank the Finnish Minister for Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade, Ville Skinnari, for opening our webinar on technology and innovation for gender equality. It is also my pleasure to welcome you to this event on behalf of the Ministry. Today's discussions will contribute to the planning of actions, goals, and tactics of the Action Coalition on Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality, which Finland, as we just heard from the Minister, proudly co-leads. We will be eager to hear your views and therefore encourage you to participate in the discussions through the chat function, where we would ask you to please indicate your name and the organization that you represent. The chat function can be found on the right side of the screen. You can follow the chat stream with full screen on, but if you want to comment on the chat or answer the polls, you need to exit the full screen. Members of our team will be following the discussion in the chat box and answering questions and comments that you raise. During this event, we will also have a couple of polls for everyone to answer. The polls will pop up on the right side of your screen where the chat box is located. As we are interested in learning more about you, we would now like to ask you to answer a poll on which stakeholder you represent. And you will have a few moments to answer. The reason we are interested to hear this is because Generation Equality is a true multi-stakeholder process. Now, before we get the results of the poll in, I will introduce today's agenda. The agenda for today's webinar includes an introduction of the Generation Equality process and a keynote speech on closing the gender gap in tech. The keynote speech will then be followed by a panel discussion focusing on how gender equality can be advanced in tech and innovation. And finally, closing remarks will be delivered by Delphine O, the French Ambassador for Gender Equality and Secretary General for the Generation Equality Forum. We will also hear commentary notes from the academia, Plan International, and the CEO of Someturva, a mobile application helping victims of online violence. We will have a very interesting afternoon ahead of us, and we are thrilled to have so many people listening in on the webinar via stream. For those who want to follow or comment on the event on Twitter, our hashtag is Generation Equality FI. I repeat, Generation Equality FI. And after the webinar, we will share the recording of the webinar as well as all relevant materials with you. The poll has now closed, and I will be sharing with you the answers. Thank you all for answering. I want to stress again that we are eager to hear your views. Views and feedback from such a diverse and multi-stakeholder audience will certainly give us additional food for thought and help us in planning the work of our Action Coalition. And now the answers. It seems that 29% of participants represent the government, 37% represent civil society, and 7% represent the technology industry, the tech sector, and another 25% other. Once again, you are warmly welcome to today's webinar. And next, let me welcome the Finnish Ambassador for Gender Equality, Katri Viinikka, to the stage to give a brief introduction on generation equality. And the floor is yours, Katri.
Thank you, Jarmo. Generation Equality is a 5-year multi-stakeholder campaign to mark the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action, the most progressive document on women's rights ever. The campaign is launched by UN Women, France, and Mexico. Year 2020 is a jubilee year of gender equality, also because it marks the 20th anniversary of Women, Peace and Security resolution of the United Nations Security Council and 10th anniversary of UN Women, the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women. What a cumbersome name. To celebrate the jubilee year, a bit overdue because of the pandemic, high-level generation equality forums will be held in Mexico and Paris in 2021. The aim of the Generation Equality campaign is to achieve systemic change and to advance gender equality in 6 themes where change has been too slow. As Minister Skinnari said in his opening statement, Finland co-leads the Action Coalition on Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality. We do this together with representatives from different stakeholders. Country leads include Tunisia, Armenia, Rwanda, and Chile. A couple of leaders are yet to be chosen from the private sector and youth. Coalition leaders will jointly identify and select 3 to 4 concrete actions the coalition will focus on. They can be related to, for example, education or legislative amendments. Leaders must also make their own commitments to advance the agenda of the coalition. Today's discussions will help us identify the most game-changing actions and commitments in relation to technology and innovation for gender equality. And the Ministry would greatly appreciate any remarks, inputs, and questions you might have. We encourage everyone to use the chat function with a low threshold. Finland has selected 4 priority areas which we want to promote in the Action Coalition. The first is increasing the amount, participation and leadership of women and girls in science, technology, engineering and math, also known as STEM, both in education and at work. We also see that bridging the gender-digital divide relating to digital skills and digitalization is critical. We must ensure that also girls from rural areas or minorities or girls with disabilities are not left behind. Thirdly, we want to make technology and innovation more gender sensitive. It is important to expand and develop women's rights relating to digitalization and innovations. We also need to support equality for women who are involved in the drafting of these rights and developing innovations. Finland's fourth priority is eliminating online gender-based violence and creating safe digital spaces for all. This is critical for ensuring the participation of girls and women in public discussion and thus for their political participation. Finland has also highlighted the importance of taking into account women and girls in all their diversity. Planning of the Action Coalition's work is still ongoing. The Action Coalition will be selecting its priority themes in the next few months. At least one of these actions will focus on adolescent girls. The selected actions for the Action Coalition and the way forward in their implementation will be announced in Generation Equality Forum in Paris in the summer of 2021. The Ministry for Foreign Affairs warmly invites organizations and companies to join in the generation equality work. Please feel free to contact us and we can take your messages forward to the other leaders of our coalition. Your company or organization can eventually also apply to the Action Coalition as members. We will be glad to answer any further questions on generation equality in the chat. Back to you, Jarmo.
Thank you so much, Katri, for those remarks. Our next speaker is Yasin Samb, and she will be delivering a keynote speech on closing the gender gap in technology. As Google's product marketing manager and diversity lead in Northern Europe, she has almost 10 years of experience in this important area. So I'm now happy to give the floor to Yasin.
Wonderful. Thank you. I hope that everyone can hear me. Excellent afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my living room in Helsinki, Meilahti. Before I go any further, I'd really like to thank the Ministry for Foreign Affairs for organizing this multi-stakeholder webinar and Minister Ville Skinnari for his heartfelt opening. It means so much to me, as well as Google, to be invited to be part of this webinar. Thank you. So now, allow me to introduce myself. As said already before, I'm Yasin Samb. To put it easy, I'm a leader at Google. I'm a growth marketer for Northern Europe. I'm Black. I'm Finnish Senegalese by nationality, born and raised in Ivory Coast, Abidjan. And I'm a woman. And finally, I'm extremely privileged to be part of this event with you. In many ways, I hope that we can open our thinking about gender equality to multiple intersectionalities, as I feel that my own identity is more or less an illustration of intersectionality. And my life experiences have been an embodiment of both the heights of privilege, but also the lows of discrimination. It is also what has led me to work 50% on driving racial equity at Google. Now, let's deep dive into the topic. Next slide, please. Excellent. So diversity and inclusion matters more than ever. As already mentioned before, in the chaotic year marked by COVID-19, but also racial injustice, the choices that companies, institutions, and our societies make today concerning equality and equity will have a huge impact to the future. Thus, I really encourage everyone in the audience today to use their own privilege, their power, and responsibility to make positive change happen and a digitally inclusive economy. As digital is only accelerating more than ever, we need to build an inclusive economy that supports women, but also other underrepresented groups. And in my view, these are the pillars that will help there. We'll first take a bit of an organizational perspective. We will talk about data-driven diversity and equity, how to start from transparency and using data to inform decisions as organizational leaders. Secondly, we will touch upon the role of digital transformation and how it can play a role in driving a digital economy, and including some multi-stakeholder collaboration examples that are required to make positive change happen. And then finally, I want to finish by taking a look at ourselves. Deep search in ourselves, hopefully inspiring some thoughts about the importance of allyship and how to be better role models, advocate the voice of others. Next slide, please. So at Google, this is how we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. Firstly, to really believe what diversity can achieve means understanding that people are an investment in any organization. It's about how we can attract, how we can develop, how we can progress, and how we can retain more underrepresented talent at all levels of the organization. Secondly, it's about delivering a framework of fairness in our processes, future-proofing all of our processes, and this is what equity really is. And lastly, we will talk about inclusion. We're talking about inclusion. Creating a culture of inclusivity means valuing everyone, making sure that everyone have a feeling of belonging, and as individuals, we understand where they want to go in their careers. Next slide, please. Before jumping into the very solution mode, I want us to acknowledge the challenge that we are still facing in terms of gender equality and equity, focusing on tech. Here are some numbers that make for some depressive reading, and unfortunately don't add up. When we look at 5% of leadership positions only in tech being held by women, or 1/3 of scientists and engineers in Finland being women, we have a long way to go. When we add to this that only 17% of women are in STEM roles in Europe, on top of the general lack of career progression in the industry, it's no wonder that so many women leave after only a short time in the tech industry. So it really shows that we have a long way to go. Next slide, please. But with this in mind, here is the case that we should be making even louder and clearer than ever. So there's no denying at least these two facts. Diversity breeds innovation and creativity, and to gender diverse leadership teams outperforms those that are not. So doing good is doing good for business, is doing good for any organization and the society. And benefits go beyond positive results of the bottom line. It's about innovation, it's about creativity, better problem solving. Many times I say that if we didn't have anyone at Google in the YouTube product team who wouldn't understand how it is to use a mobile phone with the left hand, probably the user experience would be quite different. So with 7 consumer products with more than 1 billion users globally at Google, we need to ensure that representation of these the diverse voices also in our workforce, in order to build truly for everyone. And to build a more diverse and technical and innovative society, it means also providing equal opportunities to people to succeed. This is something that we take very seriously at Google, and thus I'd like to jump into the next slide, please. So at Google, we approach diversity, equity, and inclusion as any other business case. We set very clear objectives, key results. We create a dedicated, expert, and well-resourced teams. We create a strategy and we put in action clear initiatives. And we review and track the progress regularly with leadership. Everything we do is driven by data, and these are the key performance indicators we actually pay most attention to. The end goal, obviously, is to increase representation, but in order to have greater representation, we must also understand the rates of hiring and attrition. So if we look at these numbers, it's clear that we as a company still have a long way to go. You can see that clearly 1 in 3 of current Googlers, women worldwide, are women. And unfortunately, this disproportionate balance is also reflected in our rate of new hires. Secondly, the attrition rate for women globally is 13%, which is lower than the retention of male employees. And then the representation of women at leadership levels was over 25% globally. Google was actually the first one to publish diversity report in 2014, which actually led to an immense discussion of how to bridge the gender gap in technology, and you can still get it online. Every year we publish it. Moving on to the next slide and more on the topic of digital transformation in Finland. So how do we actually solve for the problems that were, for example, mentioned in the data shown previously? In order to improve hiring and retention, we must find ways to both diversify the talent pool as well as create a high retention working culture in any organization. And the answer lies in empowering the multi-stakeholder collaboration to jointly make sure that no one is left behind, as Minister Vileskina mentioned before. Let me give an example from Google. Turning to our data center friends in Hamina, the 1.2 billion cumulative investment is a really good example how we can expose more people to the world of tech and cascade the impact of this significant digital asset. However, while the data center has brought significant job opportunities in the Hamina region, they also acknowledge the challenges of a need of a diversified talent pool. Thus, this investment has also led to collaborations, for example, with the ECAMI Educational Institute. And I'd like to bring forward especially two interesting initiatives. One, the institute facilitates the rehabilitation of educationally marginalized groups, but also they're piloting a program called Technology Playground for the Future. And what they're solving for, the first program supports those who lack the privilege of access, while the second offers an innovative way to inspire tech-curious individuals. Next slide, please. So, like the regional projects in Hamina, Google is responsible and recognizes its responsibility to move more globally to open up the digital economy for all. What I also want to point out very clearly, as mentioned before, COVID-19 has shaken the world to its core with its true effects to be still realized. And what is certain, though, is that people from underrepresented groups are disproportionately impacted. Interestingly, there was a mentioning of this particular topic on Yle Morning News today, accompanied and complemented also with the argument that job opportunities in this market situation mainly fall in male-dominant industries. So how I see it is, to make a digital economy truly democratic, we need to do two things at least. We must provide the tools that are accessible for everyone, and then we must continuously expand the opportunities for underrepresented groups to learn how to use them. Please, next slide, please. And for digital transformation to really include minorities in an organizational context, we need to create the conditions for organizations and teams to perform at best. Here, I'd like to bring Google research already done some time ago called Project Aristotle, which is a really interesting research on the key 5 conditions that create high-performing teams. And I don't see any reason why these attributes wouldn't be beneficial for any organization or the society. For example, the first number 1 condition was psychological safety. How safe do people feel? Secondly, how dependable can people be to their team members? How much can they trust each other? Secondly, there needs to be structure and clarity. 4, people need to feel that they are making an impact. And 5, the work needs to be meaningful. You can Google this research and think about how you can actually incorporate some of the learnings to your organizations and teams. We need to also enable collaboration and access to information. Today, again, in the morning show, I saw in the Yle morning show, I saw a very interesting initiative of a campaign called Computer for Everyone, led by the Finnish Church Aid. It was a really, truly multi-stakeholder initiative focusing on solving a real problem, making sure that youth and students wouldn't leave out studies just because, or education, just because of not having the devices, the computer to access their studies. Again, one really interesting example. And then finally, we need to be deliberate and persistent about the culture needed to change. At Google, we often talk about culture add instead of culture fit, which in my mind is explaining better the evolution of culture instead of it being an assimilation. Next slide, please. So, moving on to the final topic, looking at ourselves. Now, a bit of a breathe in and breathe out after all the plus 10 minutes that we've already used. This time is something that I want to make sure that you take for yourself. Change cannot happen without each of us actively raising the voice of others. It is critical to force change in the culture that blocks the perception of who the tech industry is really for. And this is where everyone has a role to play. And the blueprint for that is allyship, working for equity and justice through the lens of our own majority and advantaged group memberships. And to avoid this becoming something that's performative, something that people will just execute, I really encourage people to think about, for example, these 3 steps of acknowledge, educate, and take action in any allyship journey. Whether you do the exercise on an individual or organizational level, these stages are equally important. So the first step is really about acknowledging. You need to understand that you don't know what you don't know. That's a difficult sentence, but yeah, you don't know what you don't know. If you haven't truly acknowledged the privilege of where you are, you can't hope to be generally self-reflective. Secondly, without education, some of your actions might become superficial or even detrimental to your intentions. It's critical to understand the educational path that you personally or your organization or team needs to take to create an inclusive environment. Thus, start by yourself. Start about thinking, how can you diversify your life? What kind of leaders do you follow on social media? What kind of podcasts are you listening? What kind of books are you reading? Are you actively making an effort to understand the voice of those that you might not know about? So educate yourself to be able to enter the quality discussions where you can raise the voice of others. And then finally, take action. when working on race equity, particularly, I often say that it's not enough to say that I'm not a racist. You need to be actively anti-racist. And that is the genuine change that I hope that happens, whatever allyship journey in terms of intersectionalities you are taking. So I believe that by being also better citizens, we can create an inclusive and welcoming country brand for Finland. And that is critical to attract new workforce for our country. Then let's move on to the very final slide. Before I finish, I want to recognize how privileged my professional position at Google has been, and particularly during these uncertain times of COVID-19 and racial injustice. However, I also recognize that as an intersectional role model, there is a community out there that needs my support as an ally. So whether it is for driving for better profit for a company or building a more inclusive digital economy and leaving no one behind, we need to drive the change and actively amplify and advocate for others. With true intersectional collaboration in Finland, we have the opportunity to not only inspire people with concrete actions, but also to change our own perspectives and affect perceptions of those who shape the future. This is a great responsibility, but it's also an exciting opportunity. And I hope that you join this journey with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yasin, for those really important remarks. And as you pointed out, diversity actually pays off. Organizations that are diverse are not only better organizations or businesses for the individuals working in them, but diversity also shows in the return on investment. So thank you so much for those remarks. And I should add that Yasin, in addition to being the diversity lead at Google and the Northern Europe marketing director for the company, she's also an advisor at the ambitious Africa nonprofit organization. Now we will have a commentary to follow. The commentary will be delivered by Sepinoud Azimi. Sepinoud is a research fellow and docent in biomedical data analytics at the Department of Information Technologies at Åbo Academy University in Turku, here in Finland. And following Sepinoud's commentary, we will have time for a couple of questions. So I would continue to encourage all of you to send questions for Yasin and Sepinoud through the chat function. The floor is now yours, Sepinoud.
Thank you very much, Jarmo. Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Yasin, for your very inspiring talk. I wholeheartedly agree with your point on intersectionality, the same with the fact that the solution is actually coming from within. If we look inside, we can find the path to solving the inequality really in today's job market and academia. On the same line, let me be a bit more targeted and push upon the topic of women in technology. And I'm not necessarily drawing the line between academia and industry, although I'm coming from academia, but I believe there is not really much difference at the end. And gender equality, I believe, as a whole is probably I'm impatient and I hoped for a faster pace, but still one should confess that the dice has been rolled and we are moving forward on the right path. but at the same time, it's pity that we have not taken as concrete steps in some other fields, for example, ICT, technology, data science. And interesting enough, the topic of today's webinar is technology and innovation for gender equality. And what I would like to say is that we also need to emphasize on gender equality in technology and innovation. And if I think about gender equality movement as a whole, I think of it as several different phases: denial, acceptance, action, and new normal. We started from the point that we would see nothing out of ordinary when no women participation in the social or scientific activities. Moved to the accept phase, and yes, there is something wrong and we are missing on half of our population. And this was only when we could move to the action phase, where I believe we are today for generation equality, for gender equality. And hopefully soon we will move to the final phase of having a new normal, where the equal participation of different genders neither makes anyone sad nor happy, because it is so natural that it doesn't catch the eyes. The difference I see when I look at the same journey in technological field is that I believe we are somewhat swinging between denial and acceptance phase. We attend the meetings with no optimistic, a few technical women is present, and then we don't notice the problem. This is our denial. This is something hard-coded in us. Then when the point is raised and we move to the acceptance phase, that yes, that is certainly not good. We get there, but then we go back, we swing back to where we were. This denial is implicit and it is more difficult to challenge, since intellectually we know the situation needs to be changed. But what is internalized is dictating another image. And this is not unfortunately limited only to men. As women in technological fields, and I am no exception to the rule, we are also suffering from imposter syndrome. I think we always feel out of place in tech fields, no matter if we are as good, even sometimes better than our male counterparts. We still feel we are not enough, and we try to hide ourselves. We don't showcase ourselves. We always think that there is this final step that I need to take to be representable. With this long introduction, I move to the topic that I want to raise. You have experience working in the tech industry. I mean, if one wants to give an example, Google probably is something that comes to mind for us. And what I wonder is that at this point, what are the concrete steps that needs to be taken to remedy this internal image, to get us to a place where when a kid is asked to draw a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, and an engineer, she or he does not draw the teacher and the nurse as women and the doctor and the engineer as the men. And following on the same line, there is this second line of thought that is probably related to the previous one. And you also talked about it, data-driven diversity. You know, we are living in the world that we are producing huge amount of data. In a sense, we are placing some traces of ourselves and our opinions in the world. And at the same time, as a society, we are using this data to make decisions and devising policies. But the truth is that the data that we are producing is, in a sense, not better than who we are. How do you think we can ensure to make right decisions when it comes to gender equality with this biased data? In another word, how to make right decisions based on the bias and not so much right data. These were the points that I wanted to raise so that we think about them. And I would be also happy to hear your input on these comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sepinud, for those comments, and I particularly like what you said about the need to internalize this in the culture of the organization, or actually internalize it through the people in organizations to the culture of the organization. And this goes back to the old adage of there being a will if there being a will, there being a way. Now,
True.
our speakers have received some questions, and I would like to thank everybody for your participation. First, a question to Yasin from Lena Björkman. And the question is, how do you see anonymous CVs and recruitment benefiting women getting into those vital roles in business? And I would ask both Yasin and Sepinud to be brief in your answers because we are slightly behind the schedule. So, Yasin, please go ahead.
I will take this quite quickly. Whatever can reduce bias in terms of CV applications is critical to try. Anonymous CVs might be one way. No photos, for example, in a CV to make sure that it doesn't create any unconscious biases. That can be one option as well.
Thank you. And as for the anonymous recruiting, it's not really a technological innovation. It's common sense, and in a way, it is a kind of a social, small-scale social innovation helped by technology. And I would remind that in our work in this action coalition, we will also emphasize the role of social innovation, where Finland has a long and strong tradition. So thank you again, Yasin, for that answer. Now we have a question to both Yasin and Sepinud from Gianna Isaacson from the Abilis Foundation. How do we ensure that women and disabilities are included in the decision-making process of developing technology? Not only viewed as a final beneficiary, quote unquote, but truly involving them in the development of technology. So perhaps Sepinud, if you would like to be first.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question, and I think it is similar for all other minorities that want to get involved in the decision makings. And the fact is that I even for this, I still think that it is probably not the past that is not there. It is we haven't built the confidence in people to step forward. So if this is what we focus on, if we provide the opportunity for the people to raise their voices, no matter what background they're coming from or what disability they have. And if they are given the confidence that you are going to be heard, then inevitably they are going to be part of the decision-making process as well.
Thank you. Yasin, go ahead.
Fully second that. Thank you. I would say that, again, it applies to all minorities. And I think the most important thing here is exactly the point between the difference between equality and equity, and making sure that we understand everyone's background. So it's about really asking questions to make sure an individual personalized approach to every single employee as an investment to the organization, and making sure that they can succeed and bring the maximum output to your company.
Thank you, Yasin, and thank you again to the both of you for a very interesting and useful segment. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our host for the panel discussion, Katja Toropainen. Katja is the founder of Inclusive, a non-profit organization with a mission to advance diversity and inclusion in working life. Katja, also a former Slush chief curator, has been chosen as one of the 100 most significant technology influencers in the Nordic countries in 2018, as well as one of the 100 IT industry influencers in Finland in 2019 by the ICT media TV. So the floor is yours, Katja, to chair the panel.
chairs.
Yeah, it is, not the
So
back.
chairs.
Hi everyone. We have gathered here to discuss how to advance gender equality in technology and innovation. And our objective today in this discussion is to cover the state of gender equality in tech, challenges on the way, and also solutions. What should we as individuals be doing, and also what should be happening on organizational or societal level for change to be happening for the better? And before we start, audience, we would like to ask your opinion or something. As we heard earlier, Finland has selected 4 priority themes that Finland wants to advance. And we would like to hear which one is most important in your opinion. So in the poll, you can answer which one you think is the most important thing to advance, and the poll will appear on the right side of the screen. Please do answer, and we'll take a look at the answers in a bit. But now let's start the discussion. Let's start with the introduction of our speakers. First, we do have here Juri Birjulin. Juri, you are United Nations Youth Delegate of Finland and a master's student of world politics at the University of Helsinki. As the UN Youth Delegate, you represent the Finnish youth. Why is it important that youth is engaged in this gender equality, generation equality work?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. And yes, indeed, it is of a crucial importance to involve the young people in this gender equality process because it's called generation equality. So the young people are the new generation. Therefore, I really think it's important to have them on board and us on board. Also because globally and in Finland, I think that young people are among the most vocal advocates of gender equality. And also because when we think of the topic of gender inequality, the foundations of it are already made when people are children or people are young people, when we are in school. And when we think of the role models and the ways we learn about gender, it already starts from the childhood. So that's also where the change needs to be made. And that's an important way of influencing the different stereotypes or the other problems that we can see in the tech industry later on, for instance.
Yeah. Okay, Eva Biaudet, you're a well-known human rights activist, the member of the parliament and the president of the National Council of Women of Finland, an umbrella organization for 60 women's organizations. You have been doing gender equality work for a long time, and Finland is known for being a forerunner in gender equality. What is the state of gender equality in Finland overall? Like, where are we now, in short?
Well, perhaps in general, I could say that a lot of things are quite well, and a lot of work is being done all the time. But I think perhaps the main thing is to be aware of is that I don't think we have reached gender equality anywhere in the world, and certainly not here in Finland, because equality cannot be only sort of a little bit equality, but you really need to have complete equality. And that includes sort of freedom to choose and to have, to want, that you should really feel that you own these rights in your everyday life. And that can be in your private life or in what profession or what education you would like to choose, and also in the way you want to express yourself. So it's there's a lot of to do still, but we are learning all the time. And I think we are getting better. At the moment, we have one of the best governments in the world and the best government programs, which absolutely a multitude of actions on improving gender equality. And I think this is the best proof of showing that we really take these issues seriously. And we still have a lot of challenges, and I think one of them being tech and the whole technology industry, education. We would like to be much better. We know that women are an underused resource in the tech industry. We would also like to find more innovations that could sort of could serve us all, different people, different ages, different genders. And for that, you need a better diversity. So there's a lot to do.
Yeah.
That's the status.
Thank you. Priyanka Banerjee, you're the co-founder of BusinessViz, a company helping tech organizations become more diverse and inclusive. And you have a background in engineering and spent most of your career as an IT consultant. Yeah. Like, what inspired you to become an entrepreneur with a mission to build more inclusive workplaces?
Yeah, thank you, Katja, for that question, because while I was working as an IT consultant, I worked with people from all across the world, and it was really nice, really good experiences. But also, I found out that there are so many societal structures that still exist in our organizations. And it's not just harming the people, especially those who are underrepresented, but also it's harming the companies itself, because they cannot utilize the potential they have within the organizations. So my experiences were the one which inspired me that how can I help the tech industries to become more inclusive, understand what does it mean to have people from different backgrounds working together, how they can create a culture so that everybody feels that they belong. And it's not just good for the people and for the organization, but for the society as a whole. So here we are now.
Yeah, thank you. And Jyri Engeström, you're a partner and co-founder of Yes VC, an early-stage venture capital firm based in San Francisco. And you have founded and sold 2 consumer internet companies, one to Google and one to Groupon. Jyri, as a serial entrepreneur and as a tech investor, what is your take on gender equality in tech?
Gender equality in tech overall globally isn't great. We all know that, and even in places like Finland, it's pretty dismal when you look at venture capital funding for women founders, particularly, which is, I as a VC look at a lot. But there's a flip side to that if you're an investor, which is that you tend to seek out opportunities. And there's an overall trend that's already started long since I was born in the 70s, which is the continual demographic change and empowerment of women, both financially and in all areas of culture. And this is global. And so as a founder and investor, you want to sort of stand on the right side of history, but you also want to make bets that tack on to fundamental changes in the structure of society, because that's where the really large returns are in VC. And so betting in something like that empowerment of women, it just makes business sense. And I think that it sort of occurred to me as I was in making investments, and we've invested in companies, and the best performers have been women founders. And even today in our current portfolio, and I think the top 2 performing companies are run by women. And so I can put my money where my mouth is, because I see that that's where also the outsized returns are.
And you have been living the past years in San Francisco in the US, so are these portfolio founders based in the US? And do you think that Finland or the tech industry here in Finland has already waken up to this opportunity?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's broader than just Finland. We're talking about the Nordic countries in general, which tend to think of themselves as more advanced in terms of any measure of gender equality. And I sometimes think about it as almost like the Titanic effect, where there's a risk that you become overconfident and you look too much at a single measure, like let's say the fact that we're here in Finland, women got the vote, first country in Europe in 1906, therefore everything must be okay. And then you end up making mistakes because you are blindsided by something such as, let's say here in Finland, it's one of the riskiest places for women to be victims of domestic violence, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. And so the story is always much more nuanced. And I think the risk is that a place like the Nordics becomes overconfident and turns away from the real challenges and problems that it faces. And so that's what we really have to address, particularly when we're talking about tech, which really stands for the future and where you want to see change originate, right, and then spread to other parts of society.
Yeah, that brings up Anything to add?
I just would like. I think this was a brilliant sort of what your presentation, because I do think and I recognize that we in Finland have a particular problem with the glass ceiling, you know, and that sort of is in connection with that we somehow felt that women conquered a little bit politics. We started to conquer different professions, but we still didn't share the care obligations, and we still actually carry the biggest part of the care of our children, which means, of course, that when you really would like to have a career or being the entrepreneur who can put in a lot of efforts,
A lot of hours.
exactly, and a lot of hours, absolutely, that makes it more difficult if you don't have a partner to share with, and I think here we are somehow lagging really behind.
Particularly in times of coronavirus, as it is now.
Exactly.
November 2020 here in Finland, and I just saw some numbers from the tech sector in the United States, which I'm curious if they apply here in Finland as well, where when men were asked whether they spent more time taking care of their children because they're working at home, mostly in the tech sector, I think over 80% of men said, yes, indeed, they are spending more time. It's more equitable now. And I think only 3% of women
Experience the same.
agreed.
So basically, like parental leave policies are also something we should be updating here. Okay, great. And also, like we discussed, Finland being known for being a forerunner in gender equality. At the same time, Finland is one of the top OECD countries in gender segregation in working life, which means that the tech industry is very male-dominated, and according to the Tech Industries of Finland, less than 14% of tech industry workers are women. Priyanka, what kind of consequences are there due to this stark segregation and stereotypes?
I think there is a lot of consequences that has because of the lack of diversity. And we have been seeing it in a lot of products that are coming out because of the biases they have inherently. Now, the one thing which is without diversity, the first thing is you are not able to identify it. You don't know, you cannot identify the bias in the product that you are developing without having women or other minority groups in the company. And when you and the next thing is that you don't know how to solve it, and because you cannot identify it, and it creates a lot of these kind of, for example, we have seen recruiting algorithms that are filtering out female applicants for engineering positions, or there have been cases where there are like the criminal justice system algorithm, which was mislabeling African American people more as high risk than the white people. And so there are a lot of cases where we actually put ourselves in danger. And let's take self-driving cars. I think there is approximately only 6% of women in self-driving car industry, and it has already been seen that self-driving cars are not so good at identifying women or women of color, and that is a serious danger for the people around.
So these are like major structural challenges and touch this on the society part. Like Juri, you have been writing about how peace in Finland only happens when things like discrimination, sexism, and racism are gone. I think these structural challenges are not that often yet discussed in the context of tech industry. Should those be discussed more?
Yes, indeed, like things that happen online, they cannot be separated from the structures that exist also offline, and it's maybe too often they are separated from each other. All the problems that we have in the technology sector, they are already rooted in some of our societal problems. Let's take, for instance, gender inequality or the gender stereotypes. The technology there can also cause more gender inequality, but it's also rooted in the whole structure of this inequality. But what technology can do, it can either improve the situation or it can make it worse. And unfortunately, as Priyanka just said, it can also, since women are not getting involved as much or they're not being involved, it can go and become worse. Now, when we think of why women don't go to technology, there are many structural causes for this that already start in the childhood. I discussed this with some of my friends, and many of them told me that when they were children, they were told, or they existed in an environment that discouraged them from applying to different technology jobs or technology education because it was a boys' thing. Very typically, even if girls are good at math or good at physics, they are still being encouraged to apply to some humanitarian or humanities, these kind of subjects. And on the contrary, men and boys are more encouraged to go to tech, even though they might not be even good at maths. So these kind of things start already in the school system and the structural causes in our attitudes towards gender. And of course, it's important to remember that it's an intersectional problem. When we add race, when we add other minorities, when we add transgender minorities or disabled people, then the situation becomes even worse. And this needs to be acknowledged also in the tech industry.
Yeah. And Juri, you have been working in the tech industry in the US and also here in Finland. Like, how does this situation of gender equality look to you, and are there interesting differences between the US and Finland?
I think I mentioned the first key difference, which is that Silicon Valley is more woke, and it's actually pretty. It can be a little bit depressing, coming to Finland to celebrate summer and crayfish parties, singing traditional songs that are just horrible, very degrading to women. So there's this sort of culture shock that I think one experiences coming from a place like Silicon Valley and returning to the Nordics, where it's just so blatant and kind of disgusting how embedded this structural, it really, I would call it misogynism. It's a misogynist culture in the Nordics, very much from a Valley perspective. And so I think that's the kind of shocking part. And to your point, what you were saying, Juri, about this being something that really involves our kids, I think I saw this stat, and I think it was from 2013. And I don't think it's been updated, by the way, since then, which is that I think 1 in 10 Finnish guys work for a female boss, which is 9 in 10 work for another guy. And that's particularly, so when you start looking, it's also hierarchic. It's not just intersectional. And that's, I think, the key thing here is that you end up even less diverse when you climb up the ladder. And so that's the particular place where startups can help, because you have women actually rising in the ranks in companies, but they tend to be in the supporting functions. They're not in the line organization. They're not product responsible, and they're certainly not responsible for business, for P&L, profit and loss, right? And so that's where we can actually make a meaningful difference in startups, because obviously that's where you have a very small organization and you can tune things much more easily. And so that's kind of the opportunity I see.
May I ask you just that because I mean Silicon Valley is a very particular place, and I understand that this is sort of very company-driven development, and you sort of live in your bubble. But how come it hasn't really spread out in society? Because you can't really see that outside Silicon Valley. I mean, you wouldn't precisely describe the rest of the country in the way you did. So why is that? Because sometimes we feel that the company could, and in many companies there could be quicker change, and you would be sort of more keen on responding to to fit the markets and whatever. But how come it doesn't really enter the structures? Because here we think, as a politician, I always feel that, well, we need legislation and we need rules, and that is the way.
Yeah, I think we do, actually.
Yeah.
And look who's been in power for the last 4 years.
Exactly.
In the U.S.
I didn't
right?
want to say it.
So I think it's pretty obvious. The thing though, if you look at things that there's a few very practical things you can do as if you work in tech, but I would say this is more general. So for instance, in meetings, objectively speaking, guys tend to speak more loudly and take turns more often than women, right? So what do? If you're a female, if you're a woman, speak up. If you're a guy, shut up, right? And a lot of people actually, I find, especially in Finland, get very upset about this because especially for Nordic guys, equality means that it must be 50-50, right? Everybody has to speak evenly, right? It's always equity, right? But I think like a US perspective on that, and I think one person who probably exemplifies it more than anyone else in the US culture would be Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, who recently passed away, Supreme Court Justice, and I would say an icon of women's rights in many ways, not more than just one. And I remember an interview where she was asked, would you say that gender equality or equity would be satisfied when the United States Supreme Court is half men, half women, right? And famously, her answer was, I think it would be satisfied, or it would become realized when it was 100% women and nobody noticed, right? And maybe you could ask, maybe keep it that way for the next 250 years, since it's actually been the opposite for the last 250 years, right? And that's kind of where, this thing is like Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Well, of course all lives matter. It's the same thing where, I think for especially the Nordic guys, I think we need to, choose to work for women, right? If 9 out of 10 of us work for a guy, how about choosing, if you have the option, and I think most of us actually do, right? I've made that option, right? I work for a woman, right? I could have taken a job opportunity to work for a guy. And I think that actually represents the future. So if you're in tech where you actually want to represent the future, these kinds of things really matter because they're path dependent and you can then hopefully reap rewards later.
Yeah. So now we started talking more about also the culture, like what is in there in the culture of tech, and let's still take one answer before we take a look at the answers from the audience regarding the poll. Like, what is the biggest challenge in the tech culture, Preukka?
Well, he mentioned quite a lot of challenges that we already have, but one thing we not quite often talk about, and probably that I would like to share, is normalization culture. Like, for example, even women, they tend to normalize this, okay, this is how it has been, or this is how it always happens, and it is normal that women are not wired that way, or men are more wired in tech. So changing that narrative, so that is, I feel, is one of the biggest challenges, that we ourselves create this loop of bias and inequality by normalizing the situation rather than speaking up that, hey, this is unfair organization policy and not something I am wired with or not. So I think that is one very key challenge that nobody really talks about.
So we need to make also these things visible that we don't notice.
May I say, I agree with this and you, but I do think that we need more systematic and more ambitious sort of work on sort of fighting discrimination and fighting inequality. And I think this is what we, a little bit what you touched upon, that and you also said that, we have this idea that we are there, that we are equal, and that's enough. But it's much more complicated than that. And for instance, pay gaps in tech industry is still there, even if there must be very brilliant women because they have been managed to, to break the sort of the stereotypical rules. But still, you can see, and I think we had a Finnish famous company called Nokia who actually has a very strong program on. They actually investigated the reasons behind the pay gaps, and they first didn't sort of think that this would be real thing, because why would it, they felt, because they wouldn't agree with it, sort of in principle. But they found out that 90% of the cases where there was a pay gap, an inexplicable pay gap, it was because of gender. So they actually started to work on it before they really believed the problem. And I think this is what one has to do. One has to work, to find structures, to find ways of lowering thresholds, talking about gender equality, and trying to sort of reveal our biases in some way.
So we need a change on all fronts. Let's still take actually the voice of youth for this one. Like, as the voice for youth, like Juri, what do you think are the biggest concerns that youth has in relation to gender equality and technology?
Well, first of all, some of the things I already mentioned regarding the different attitudes already starting from the youth. When we think of, I had this statistic that only 3% of girls or young women have thought of a career in tech. So this is already something that we need to be able to change. On the other hand, so this is like a lack of encouragement and this segregation of professions that we already spoke about here. Now, another thing that we have not discussed here so far that I think is of a big concern for young people is the question of online harassment. And it's a very serious problem. I saw a statistic that up to 40% of girls in Finland have been victims of harassment, and this can take form of bullying or like defamation or impersonation, surveillance, or these kind of things. And of course, a lot of it is sexual harassment. And this is an issue that we really need to bring up, especially now in the times of coronavirus. It's become much worse because people are spending their time online. And as we can see, it also does not happen only online, but it very often translates into also physical violence, or it can translate in other forms of harassment which take place in the real world. And I think this is also a very, very serious problem that we need to talk more in regards to tech industry as well.
Yeah. And if I could add to the topic of like online harassment, it's not just happening online, but a lot of sexual harassment in the workplaces. And from the product perspective, I feel that it also, the lack of diversity manifests into building products that do not identify how it is acting or adding into online harassment, or the structures within the organizations that are created by homogeneous group of individuals, and they don't really realize how those policies or how those products are adding to the harassment issues for women in the organizations or in the online space. So I think that is also one key aspect, that maybe building or bringing more diversity into building policies as well as products are going to also impact on how online violence or sexual harassment in workplaces manifests.
Now we've covered a lot of challenges. Next, let's take the answers of the poll and then go to the solution part. Like, what should we do to change things? Do we have the answers of the poll here? So we asked you, audience, like, which one of Finland's 4 priorities is most important in your opinion? And we have quite clear first answer to this. So 40% of you are thinking that increasing the amount and participation and leadership of women and girls in STEM, both in education and at work, is the most important focus point. The second one is bridging the gender-digital divide relating to digital skills and digitalization with 17%. And just behind that is developing gender-sensitive technology and innovations. And as the fourth one, there's eliminating online gender-based violence and creating safe digital spaces for all. Yeah, actually the 3 last ones, it seems, are quite around the same, like nearby each other. Does this look like, how does this look to you? Do you agree that Finland's first priority should be increasing the amount, participation and leadership of women and girls in STEM, both in education and at work?
If I may, I think the number one is actually a very, very large sort of area, because there's both this participation and leadership. So there's two challenges, and then of course it's both education and work. So it covers a lot, and I think that it is true in the way that we really need to find a way where we don't repress girls who are actually interested in techs not to choose it, because that is actually what's happening today. That and I think the amazing thing is that we had this research, which probably you are all familiar with, among 10-year-olds in school, where actually they were asked, what's your best subject and what are you really good at, and the girls and boys, they answered very stereotypically. So, didn't have a correlation to what their grades were. I mean, even if they have very good grades, the girls' grades in maths, for instance, they said that, well, I'm better at reading than in maths. And the boys did the reverse. So they already has this strange idea that girls' area where they are better at is not the STEM areas. And the same happened later when they choose, what would they want to study. The girls seem to need much higher grades to be convinced that this would be their subject to start to study with, whereas the boys would satisfy with a little lower grade and feel, yes, I want to do this. So we have a lot of strange ideas embedded already in kids, which we grown-ups, and the environment probably inflicts. So we really have to be very aware in school or in early childcare already that we have to sort of fight this way of sort of restricting children from what they actually are, and letting them be free as individuals, not so much dividing them into girls and boys all the time. They can be girls and boys freely, but they don't have to. Doesn't have to be restricted. Doesn't have to be girls' games and boys' games.
Yeah, so there's already early on, as we grow, there is a lot of challenges. And then when we take a look at the current tech industry, it consists of big tech companies, startups that are growing, and also investors who decide which startups get funding and get to grow to big tech companies. And here in the Nordics, women-founded startups or tech companies get around 1% of the investments. Why is this 1% like, Yuri?
It's because of the sauna.
I
The
agree.
investments there.
That is true. It's very strange.
It's all that you were talking about, right? And I think the audience who answered the poll and said that by far the most important thing is for women to take these leadership positions is correct. But like you were sort of pointing out, I think that's actually the outcome of the three other things that were listed, right? And so essentially this, and cultural change doesn't always have to be slow, right? And it's already happening, and it happens through this fact that you actually point these things out, right? But it comes from, and I think that's why, and I see it, I have three children, 2 girls and 1 boy, and I can see that especially, and it's interesting always, and I did this as a kid myself when I went back and forth between Californian schools and Finnish schools, and you can see these differences, and it's really, really strong, this gender, there's here in Finland, it's the girls have separate physical education from boys.
So what should we do? How to change that?
It has actually changed that part.
That's exactly the point, right? Is you just one by one talk about them and experiment with doing it differently, and then when nobody thinks that's strange anymore, I think you've succeeded and you can move on to the next thing.
So there's
and then we have to attack the leaders, I think, and the leadership skills, because I think that's also one that, for some reason you haven't, there hasn't been any sort of challenges on leaders to know about gender equality or biases. This is something that it's not required, but I think we should. A good leader also is interested in this kind of issues.
So gender equality and these topics should be seen as competencies for leaders.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Priyanka, do you want to add more on the like organizational side? Like what
Yeah,
should
definitely.
be happening?
I think that a lot of times when companies are working towards gender equality or inclusion, they are more directed towards, we give workshops to the individuals, unconscious bias, and which is really good, but it is only up to a limit that you can self-correct yourself until you see that your organization is committed and is making structural changes and creating long-term sustainable culture change. So I think that is one thing for the organizations that I would like to say, that identify the gaps in your policies and in your work culture, what is adding to the inequality, and then you can start creating action plans. Like, for example, you can have a anonymous coding contest, then having CVs or resume screens, right? Or you can have like a transparent pay structure, or you can have proper, measurable performance evaluation. So don't give better results or satisfactory work thing. So have very specific and measurable performance evaluation. And there are so much that the organizations can do. But the first thing is to show the commitment, put your resources, identify the gaps, and create an action plan to go for it.
And Yuri, what would be, like, you're a tech entrepreneur and tech investor, like you're directly coming from the tech industry. What would be your message to technology, like CEOs, investors, people in positions of power? What should be happening or for solutions?
Yeah, I think, specific to startups, there's things like, I think if you're an investor, make sure that when you invest in women founders, that you help them in multiple ways to actually begin investing themselves. This is one of the key things, I think, it's a network, and women, through exclusive practices like the saunas, et cetera, constantly and consistently get left out of the networks, right? And so one of them is angel investing, for instance. So you actually want all your women founders in your portfolio to make sure that they're capable of making angel investments themselves, so that they get on the cap tables and own equity in other companies, right? Because that's how you build wealth. And so it's concrete things like that in the startup ecosystem, I think over time will begin to shift that balance from that 1% to a more equitable norm, right? But right now, I think the problem also is that everyone is incentivized by guys, right? Because the whole structure is vertically.
So basically, funding is one important part, and we need more women investors and wealth creation for women as well. We're coming towards the end of the panel way too soon, but let's take steal from everyone last answers, like what kind of future would you like to see, and what should be happening and changing now that we get there? Yuri?
Well, I work a lot with the United Nations since I'm a UN youth delegate, and I think also that as we talked about the structural causes, we need to also address them, and everything is interrelated. When we speak of sustainable development, I've heard a good quote that it's like a house with 17 doors. We can all reach the different sustainable development goals, but we need to reach all of them. They're all interconnected. And this also relates to technology. We have these global gender equality plans, but they need to be incorporated in all different spheres, and it's all related to each other. So I think that's very important also to remember to address the structural causes behind these problems.
And I actually agreeing with you. I think sort of systematically putting gender equality or enhancing gender equality and sort of non-discrimination on the agenda and thinking that that's a part of having success in your business or whatever you do, actually, I think that's the key.
I think I like to point out 2 points, especially for Finland as a nation. First, not to see gender equality as a black and white topic, because women also has a lot of intersectionality, like you mentioned before, that it could be foreign-born women or women with disabilities or women, transgender women. So we have to think that where is the gender equality coming and how are we making it more intersectional? And then changing the attitude also in the tech industry, but also overall from equality to equity. And that's what also I think Yasin gave a really nice presentation, so people already know what's the difference. And you mentioned before that we are too much 50-50, so probably moving that 50-50 equality, like so much that attitude to having equity and equal opportunities for everyone. So I think that would make a lot of difference. What do you think?
Yeah, you know, I don't think it's that hard. It's kind of like just we're almost dealing with something that's inevitable, right? Because it's so obvious that this is the right direction. So I think you just want to just be kind, and not always go with the pack, because the problem right now is, especially here in the Nordics, I think it's a very pack-minded, it's very institutionalized. Kids go through daycare, everything has this kind of set rote thing, and it's one of the challenges when you talk about entrepreneurship here. Classic problem for the slush generation has been to demonstrate that they can think differently and be entrepreneurs and somehow act as individual agents. And so now I think we also kind of have to get used to intersectionality, this idea that you're actually going to probably piss people off. And that's okay, because frankly it's threatening to a lot of guys that suddenly you would have a female boss. It actually is, and that isn't going to be okay. And you're going to have to actually fight a little bit in order to make some of these changes happen. And this is something that I think you should also just kind of be open and accepting about, because sometimes there's conflict. And one of the things that we need to handle better is conflict. Going back to your point about harassment online and this whole culture of right now, we're not doing a good job. So this is one of those issues, and we need to be able to also deal with the fact that not everyone always agrees.
Yeah. Thank you. And we still have some time for questions from the audience. Let's see if we get questions from there. But actually, in the meanwhile, this raises a question, because it's so often that it's only women or majority women discussing gender equality topics. So how do we get men involved with this one? First Yuri and then Yuri.
Yeah, it's like my partner Katarina Fake, I think, answered to when she was asked to speak at the first TED Women, and she said, sure, I'll speak on 3 conditions, right? 1, all the speakers be women. 2, make half of the audience be men. And then 3, change the name of the conference from TED Women to TED, right? And the point is, let's not ghettoize this conversation. Next time we have a discussion about women in entrepreneurship or tech, let's have it be an all-male panel talking about that instead of, typically it's the other way around, right? So we need to sort of make a point of making sure that there are all-female panels titled The Most Awesome Entrepreneurship Lessons Ever, right? That we in tech actually also get used to this idea that this whole business can be run by women, and that's okay, right? And sometimes, this is going to, I think we're gonna be there actually more quickly than people actually realize. Like if you look at right now, the companies that are really growing fast, there are, I think, many women entrepreneurs there that have small companies that aren't yet big, but are going to be soon. So I'm very, very optimistic right now because I think that this is actually going to be accelerating more quickly than people realize.
So we need to be breaking these old stereotypes. Do you see more young people and young men getting involved with the gender equality topics?
Well, that's a difficult question. On the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, perhaps no. It really depends. Young people are not one single group. When I was coming to this panel, I also really was thinking about this. What can I say? What is my role? How can I represent somebody, especially as a white male speaking about gender equality? But I think we had a good discussion before this event that if I listen, if I educate myself, if I try to raise the voice of somebody who has the experience without trying to making myself the hero, I think maybe that's the right direction and the way. And what we can do is, the first thing is to educate ourselves, learn more about these things, and what the different organizations or the industry can do is precisely what you were saying, Yuri, that get involved, get people involved who are usually not involved in the way they are. So I think that's very simple. It's not that difficult in the end. And I've been studying in a subject which has a lot of women, perhaps a lot of more women than men. And I learn about these things every day by just interacting. We need more interaction for that.
True. Okay, we have a couple of comments from the audience. The first comment is from Ellen Walker from Rights Tech Women. The comment is, there is much to do. We can reach gender equality in STEM employment by 2030 if large percentage of working women reskill in STEM and girls and women are empowered to go into these fields, and also promote women already working in STEM. Yeah, by 2030. It looks like when we're looking at the data points that actually the data or change is not happening fast.
Yeah. I think one thing that I always see when it comes to gender equality, people are like, we have to empower women, we have to reskill them in, like, which is super important, but we forget the other half. So when we are talking about organizations and why we don't have leaders, female leaders, is also because the definition of leadership is something which is very different, and then people try to convert, okay, you want to be a leader, then you have to be thinking more like him, or you need to have the skills that he possesses. So it is also about the other aspect that, of course, doing all of this, which is super important, but also changing the narrative of who can be a leader, who can be an engineer. That is also very important. And I hope if we integrate that second part into it, we might make change faster than what is happening now.
That's a very beautiful ending. Let's change the narrative of who can be a leader. Thank you for all of the panelists for this discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We do have here two commentary speeches from two different speakers. The first commentary speech is from Suvi Uski. Suvi is a PhD social psychologist and the CEO and co-founder of a legal tech startup, Someturva, or Somebody, that aims to offer access to justice to social media users with help of AI, law, and social psychology. She is also a partner in an edtech startup, Mightyfire, that educates social skills in schools. Welcome, Suvi.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great joy to follow and see how the panelists did, and really enjoyed myself, and actually see also that I can contribute to this discussion or on this commentary from three different aspects. And first of being that, of course, I consider myself within this discussion as a role model, definitely, for young women in Finland and globally. I've done it in tech, so applauds to me and all of you who have helped me on my way. And also about how we speak about tech in this, or in today's society. I think what should we think of is that tech has changed. Our company, Somebody, works to help victims of social media harassment of all ages, and what we do happens really in scale. So we have developed AI tools that can help us to provide the best professional help available to these victims. And when we talk about that, like being a woman in tech, I definitely see myself as a facilitator. So not perhaps coming from STEM subjects in such, but social psychology, maybe softer skills, and so. But my role in tech is really to put kind of brilliant minds together and make sure that these people are able to communicate and build like long-lasting impact to the society. So what I see here as a one main point is to really look at how we think about like what tech really is. Is it like is it rocket science, or is it kind of understanding the people and their needs, or how to build very difficult kind of solutions to the existing crucial problems we have in our society. And second aspect here is, of course, me as an entrepreneur. So as a startup leader, co-founder, I think that, of course, what we're doing here, helping the victims of online harassment, when I go and meet the investors that I would like to get to invest into our company, of course, if the problem isn't something that they are really aware of beforehand, it's pretty hard to make a point why to invest now. And I think that times are becoming easier and easier day by day. And for example, in Finland, when we talk about online harassment, we started Somebody in 2017, and now 2020, it's a lot more easier to tell people what we do. So the first 2 years, we had to explain to every person we met that what do young people experience online, and how much they actually need professional help. But now in 2020, after Vastaamo scandal that happened in Finland, we don't have to tell anyone what we do. And it's kind of the development here happening. But yeah, and I see that the investors will get more and more in line of seeing like what we're doing here and how much actually world needs our help. My third point here goes to online harassment. So as the panelists and the keynote speakers today already kind of proposed, it's something that we are not really aware of, that the young people whom we are kind of building the society for now are actually struggling with totally another kind of stress and pressure and maybe gender inequality as well. So what I'm thinking of here is that, like in Somebody, when we help young girls and women, the reports that say that 1/3 of Finnish girls, or every third Finnish girl, have been sexually harassed during the 12 months online. During the past 12 months online, haven't got any help for that. And if we think that these young women who live in online cultures every day and suffer harassment, bullying, receiving lots of dick pics, their intimate information is being spread around their schools and big WhatsApp groups, and so I think the reality for them is very different. And when we look at like 12-year-olds today and see them after 10 years when they're 22, they have grown up to a society that actually allows people to harass them every day, and there are no tools for that. And from this kind of multi-layer perspective of my comment here, I think my take-home message to this webinar today is really to look for the ways to find kind of scalable solutions to these problems that are happening in massive scale. So not kind of individual, like power is enough for helping every single individual, but we actually need the tech here to maximize the help and the change that we want to happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the commentary speech, Suvi. And next we still have one commentary speech from Nora. Nora Lindström works on issues of gender, tech and development as the global lead for digital development at Plan International. She also sits on the first ever advisory council for the Principles for Digital Development, stewarded by the Digital Impact Alliance. Welcome, Nora. So looks like we have some sound issues. Perhaps Nora is here, but let's take a second to try to get also the speech and voice work here. Nora, do you have mute on? Have you tried to unmute yourself? Okay, unfortunately, it looks like that this page is not working right now, and we're unavailable to get Nora on the line. So then instead, let's have Jarmo Sareva still back on the stage. Welcome, Jarmo.
Thank you, Katja. Thank you very much for chairing the panel, and also thank you to all panelists. I just wanted to add one thing about the commentary from Someturva. It just so happens that Finland has been funding and steering a project with UNICEF on creating policy guidance for artificial intelligence systems and children, creating basically child-centric AI systems. And Someturva with SomeBuddy will be one of the actors that will be piloting this policy guidance in the coming months. And of course, the policy guidance that UNICEF together with us is creating very much also affects girls and adolescent girls. Now, to closing remarks, if I should sum up some of the key themes that have come up during today's discussions. First of all, It appears that everybody agrees that gender equality is not only the right thing to do, but it's also good for business. More diverse organizations and businesses have a better bottom line and provide shareholder value. Another theme that has clearly come up, and somebody mentioned it during the discussion today, is that technology can either improve equality or make it worse. And together we can and we must make sure that technology works for the better. Another theme that came up is the importance to have male allies in this work. The technology industry is still, as we have heard and as we know, very much dominated by men. And for the change to happen, and for that change to happen as quickly as possible, we do need male allies and male role models in the industry. Yet another theme that has come up is the necessity for young people to be on board in the generation equality process. The Secretary General of the UN has, from the very start of his term, emphasized the need to bring young people on board in the work of the UN, and this certainly applies to this process as well. And that culture change that we have heard calls for really comes with young people. Then moving forward, there's also been emphasis on social norms, stereotypes, and social structures. For example, the fact that from an early age, children are taught that boys should go to STEM and girls should go somewhere else. And even here in Finland, science, technology, engineering, math are still way too segregated. We have to get our act together and be better in this respect. Then one theme that has clearly come up is the fact that technology can either improve the situation or make it worse regarding gender equality. Women are not in the development of technology, which is dangerous. We need more women as tech developers to make sure that technology improves gender equality. Then one important theme that is particularly close to our hearts in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs is online harassment. And as we heard during the panel discussion, the online gender-based violence, harassment, bullying affects so many girls, young women, and women of all ages. And it can what it can lead to is the fact that girls and women withdraw from the online space. And that then has a clear impact on their political participation in political life. So that is a huge challenge, and we need to change that, and we need men to be part of that change. Now, we will be concluding this event with closing remarks delivered by the French ambassador for gender equality, Delphine O. Ambassador O is also the Secretary General of the Generation Equality Forum and a former member of the French Parliament. We would like to thank France and Mexico for launching this game-changing Generation Equality campaign, and UN Women for coordinating the process. France and Mexico have provided and continue to provide the important political leadership in this process, and we are very grateful for that. So, on behalf of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, I thank all participants for having joined us today. We hope to see many of you participating in the generation equality process in the years to come. No, this is, after all, a 5-year process. You can participate by contacting us, and we will take your messages forward to the Action Coalition. And finally, your company or organization can also eventually apply to join the Action Coalition as a member. So, with these words, Delphine O, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Delphine O. I am a French ambassador and the Secretary General for the Generation Equality Forum. I would like to thank the Finnish government for taking the initiative of this very important webinar on the Action Coalition on Innovation and Technology and the place and role of women in this field. We are extremely delighted to have Finland as a champion of one of these 6 action coalitions, and I would like to commend the commitment of the Finnish government, together with its Prime Minister, together with its Foreign Ministry, together with its Ambassador for Women's Rights, for gender equality, and specifically to the Generation Equality Forum. We are looking forward to hosting you next year, both in Mexico in March and then in Paris in June, either physically or digitally. We're very much looking forward to the announcement of this action coalition, together with the other champions from the governmental area, from international organizations, from the private sector, from civil society organizations, from youth organizations. I see the interest that has been raised in Finland around this action coalition and around the Generation Equality Forum. I am thrilled by it because, as I often say, we need to have the same kind of interest, the same level of enthusiasm and commitments that we have seen for climate change, now for gender equality. So all together, let's make next year the year of generation equality. I invite you to Mexico and to Paris. Thank you very much.